everybody, and welcome back to another roundtable discussion. We have got 4 of the best experts in the business, and tonight's discussion is all going to be about shoulder issues associated with riding. So last time we covered lower back pain, and it is available to watch back on YouTube if you would like to do so. But today is all about shoulder issues. But before we crack on, let's say hello to everybody. Tony, how is everything with you in the States?
Everything is going well. Just working with a lot of riders, getting ready to work through off-season training programs to prepare them for 2021.
Yes, because it's the perfect time, isn't it? A lot of people's seasons are coming to a close. You've got a bit of time. Horses might be having a break. Now is the time. Don't relax. This is the time for you. Jenny, you're in the UK with me. We're on a bit of a weird second lockdown. How's everything going?
Yeah, hi Nicole and everyone else, thank you for having me. It's going okay. I think at the moment my job is to continue to try and help people transition from gym training to home training and try and keep them motivated whilst everything else is a little bit low on lockdown too.
Yeah, and it's motivation is actually a really good word for this time of year because we're not quite into Christmas and everybody is feeling a bit blah, but actually
tiring.
Yeah, this can really help. Tash, it is very early for you in Australia when we're recording this. I wish I looked as bright and breezy as you in the morning.
Thank you. Hey guys, how you going?
And finally, Lisa, how is everything with you as well?
Oh, it's going well. Our numbers are a bit high, so we're all trying to stay motivated and come up with alternative ways to be ready for 2021.
Exactly. And 2021 is just around the corner, but let's talk shoulder pain. So Tony, before we really start to answer some of the questions that we've had sent in, why do we see shoulder pain be such an issue in those people that are riding?
I think it's becoming a bigger issue because of just how our society has lent itself more to having ourselves in front of computers, on phones, watching TV, and practicing this slouch position, and where muscles get weaker on one side and then muscles get tighter on the other. And now you start seeing that more often in athletes, especially when they are really young. I have a nephew that he dumps his neck forward completely and rounds his shoulders. And I think at that age, I would say that's, I don't want to say fine, but I think what happens is there's no balance. So if I were to do that when I was a little kid, and then I went out and played and hung on jungle gyms, did exercises where my shoulders were strengthening, throwing rocks at cars, just like playing.
You threw rocks at cars.
Just doing things that kids do, running away, that I would now balance out the issue of being slouched over for so many hours at school, but then having recess, having time where we can play. And I think the lack of play and the increase of screen time has led to this issue.
Yeah, and do you know what? It's funny because just before we started recording this, we were all chatting and the P word of posture came up, which is really relevant to me. And I looked at myself back in the camera and I was literally slumped like this. My shoulders were down, I was hunched over, and I immediately thought it's just habit, like it becomes a bad habit. And unfortunately, I sit in front of a computer a lot. That is so easy to fall into, and we just need to be a little bit more aware about it. So my computer is now propped up. If you're watching at home, I'm going to be demonstrating good habits for the rest of the show. Okay, let's get into a couple of the questions. So we have been asking you guys at home across all of our social media accounts to send in any questions. And I'm going to go to the first question being, I have chronic pain in and around my right shoulder, which started when I broke my collarbone 6 years ago. Obviously not helped by daily chores that go along with having a horse. Working really hard on regaining full strength, partly through doing, I think Jenny, she does your rider workouts. It's from Jane Buchan, who events here in the UK, but she still suffers under the scapula and at the top of the bicep. Are there any targeted stretches or exercises which can help? Jenny, I'll come to you with that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like everyone to pitch in where possible, because I think it's really important just to put this out there that I'm not a physical therapist, nor am I a clinical specialist. So when I have someone that presents like this, and I'm not sure of their background, especially if I'm not physically with them, I would always say go to speak to a clinician first, physical therapist, and let them give you their expert opinion on what is good. And then I can work with that feedback and build it into my strength training program. And I think that's sometimes where, you know, I can't step out of my lane and help someone that is in pain. That isn't my job. However, if someone's coming to me and they're having pain sort of under their sort of scapula, which is very common, you know, under and over the scapula is a common area of tension, particularly if we're quite round shouldered. I mean, breaking your clavicle is very common in riders, because obviously when we fall off, if we're not taught to fall properly, put the arms out and bam, it's gone. And if we don't rehab that properly, we're then going to have that posture related habit. So I think a lot of it is going to be relearning the movement patterns. She's probably suffering from, because this is one of the people that is in my not one-on-one coaching program, so this is someone that's in a like membership program, if you like. So if she's suffering and she needs specialist advice for that particular person or someone that's similar, I would probably work with someone one-on-one for a little bit so they can help you out specifically. Right-handedness is gonna be an issue with that, because you're right-handed. You've also, well, I assume you may not be, but if you're right-handed, you've broken your right collarbone. If you look at the research as well, there's a lot of right shoulder limitation, which means we're moving more this way, which means that we're going to be even more blocked on the right. So there's a few things, I'm sort of messing about with the question here. There's a few things we can do. First of all, we can look at mobility issues and look at where you're immobile. And I'm going to assume, based on what you've said, that you have very tight pecs, tight lats, which is because tight pecs and tight lats can also internally rotate the humerus, as well as poor shoulder musculature, if you like. So I'd probably look at mobilizing those areas, and then strengthening up the posterior chain so that that tightness is offset by the strength. So opening up like that, and that could be done by a complete variety of exercises, be very specific to her, because she might be because sometimes you do feel pain in the right, and actually it might stem from the left, or it might stem from the left hip, or it could be from a foot injury, and so that's where I think it's a little bit more complicated than sometimes people might like, and that we need to. I probably need to send to a clinician and then work with a S&C one-on-one for a bit before she goes back off on her own.
I think this actually relates back to what we spoke about in the last show with lower back pain, of the overriding message that really came from that was get expert help in whatever sort of discipline you are needing that help in, so that all of those sort of facets within your life can work together to make it better. Because it isn't just a case of, and we're going to talk about braces and things like that a little bit later in the show, it's not just necessarily something that can mask the problem and might give you some temporary relief, but actually it doesn't help you in the long run. Has anybody else got anything that they would like to add on that one?
I've personally broken both collarbones, separate injuries. But one I had surgically repaired, so one I've got plated, and the other one was left to just fix itself. And I know that the one that I had just to fix itself, it wasn't displaced enough to need surgery, but it doesn't sit level, and it hasn't sat back into place. So my collarbones actually sit crossed over slightly. So my right collarbone is about maybe 1.5 centimeters shorter than my left, and my clavicle doesn't actually sit as well into the AC joint. So all of a sudden, then I've got that difference in shoulder distance, and then it's also not sitting flush into the AC joint, which leads it to be a little bit less stable and less strong. And I do get a lot more problems through my right side, and then causing sort of the scapular stabilizers to be so much weaker on my right side. I did that 15 years ago, and it's still my sort of problem side, as opposed to this one that I did 5 years ago, and I've got no problems with my side that was surgically repaired and popped back into place properly. So I just thought I'd add that in there, that you really have to do the physio, because I think naive teenager, I just really didn't do the correct physical therapy from that. But also If it's not quite sitting right, then that can place a little bit of an anatomical change to the joint where it's supposed to work in a certain way and it's not now.
You make a really important point there, because I think it's really important that we always talk about correct form and movement and posture, but sometimes you can't get correct form or movement or posture because of a limitation or an injury. And if we relate it back to horses, for example, like if you had a horse with, I don't know, some osteochondritis or something, and they had some fused bone and they had a mechanical lameness but wasn't pain anymore, so you do the nerve blocks and they're still lame despite the fact that they're not in pain because we've removed the pain, that might happen with you as well. So you might actually have a limitation or immobility even though it's not a problem. So that's where working one-on-one rather than going on your own, somebody would know that about you. So instead of trying to get you to get to that range which we know you can't get to, you know, so I think that's a really important point, that
Exactly.
Sometimes you have to work within your individual means when you've had an injury or when you're working with something, and it's impossible for us to know that without working with you.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. Tony, Lisa, either of you, anything that you'd like to add on that one, or should we talk about the controversial topic of posture supports?
Actually, if it's all right, I would like to just touch on that for a second, because as a lot of us, I too broke my right collarbone, and as a rider, I think what you guys have already said is super important, that obviously you go and give medical attention. But I think for myself, that's where yoga became really apparent for me. That's one of the reasons that I actually got into yoga, was because I was so imbalanced in my movement left to right. I didn't even recognize that until I started doing more, just call them active stretches. And from there, building into a strength program with someone like one of the people on here. Because as a rider, what ends up happening is you have a lot of compensatory movements in the tack. So like Tosh was saying, with her right shoulder, they a little bit off in the joint and a little bit short, mine as well. So as I'm riding, I have a much harder time bringing my right shoulder back. And it's just slower to do that. It's stiffer. I don't have the range of motion I do on my left. What that means when I'm riding is that my horses typically turn left better than they do right, because while I can't quite bring my right shoulder back, I'm generally compensating by sitting a little bit more on my left sit bone, which then is creating more bend left in the horse. And so understanding what your limitations are, because we all have them, and then how they directly apply to what's happening when you're in the tack is really, really important. And then you can kind of take the whole thing apart, because otherwise you're getting very frustrated in lessons saying, well, I can't turn right. Well, yeah, because your shoulder doesn't do that. So then you go back to somebody like Tosh or Tony or, any of the brilliant people on here, go, so I can't turn right. Can you help me turn right and strengthen that? I think that's really important.
I'd like to add to that, just because I think this is also going to carry on to the next question.
Yes.
And that's a couple of things. Number one, really, really specific to this person that asked the question. And this is what myself and I have a physical therapist on staff. And together we've helped so many riders get out of pain. And here's the number one thing that we work on: convincing them to give themselves a break from riding. That is the most difficult thing to do, because what people don't understand is sometimes pain can be caused through constant messaging from the brain to the injured spot. So things could be healed, inflammation could be gone, areas could be stronger. So technically there shouldn't be any pain, but they're still receiving the message because they're still riding while they're doing all these things. So it's very difficult to change any type of relief when there's a message always getting sent there. So what we found is that when we, I don't want to say force, but when we strongly suggest riders to take a break, and that's like pulling teeth, literally, I'm going to say, that hard, that pain starts to subside, because the message, the environment in which pain is created, it has subsided. So things start to get better, because now they're just training. Now we're really just working on strengthening. So if that alone were to help that person, where she asked the question that she's still having pain because she's having subscapular issues, and which is now creating probably bicep tendon issues. It's because it just keeps getting inflamed, even through her PT, if she's doing any, because she keeps riding. So she's going to have to make a decision. What's going to have the most benefit? Riding with pain and getting that much better, or resting and maybe your riding doesn't improve technically, but your riding improves this much because you're not in pain. So now you're able to access things that you wouldn't be able to access because pain blocks recruitment of muscle. It's the body doesn't understand about getting better as a rider. It just understands get out of pain.
Yeah,
so,
and you're going to enjoy it a hell of a lot more if you're not in pain as well.
Well, that's a good point, because pain directly correlates to mood, depression, emotion.
Right. So I think that in itself is the biggest takeaway when someone continues to have pain, even though they're doing therapy, even though they're doing training, is you have to have rest. You have to have proper nutrition to be able to support and give yourself resources to heal, or when you're going through training to be able to work on the musculature, strengthen it. And we're not talking about gaining bulk, hypertrophy. We're just talking about resources for there to be healing, for inflammation to go down. So that would be my advice to that person, without giving any other exercises, is you have to be able to take a break and really focus on it.
And actually, again, as we said a little bit earlier on in the show, now could be a good time to do that. So if you're thinking, do you know what, actually, I have been getting through, and we're all guilty of that. Oh, I've just got this one more competition to do, or that's really important, or I need to do this. But now could be a chance for you to actually take a step back, see the people that you need to see, get a program in place to make yourself stronger. So I think they're all really, really relevant points. We spoke a little bit about lower back supports for the last show on lower back pain. What about posture braces? I don't think I even knew a posture brace existed, but what are your thoughts on that, Tony? I'll start with you. What do you think? Is there a place for them short term, long term? What do you think?
I think to give them, I think a little bit of credit. I think some people use them to help heal the process from broken collarbone so that they can align better. So there, I think, is a clinical purpose for wearing these posture braces. I think that when it comes to performance, and it's like a crutch, and you're trying to position your anatomy in positions where it doesn't own it. What I mean by owning it is you can put a muscle into a stretch, but if it doesn't automatically get there on their own, then it doesn't own that position. Therefore, as soon as the brace comes off, then you're going to go back to the range of motion that you actually own, which would be rounded shoulders again. It's like, I think I've used this before. This analogy is like putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. So for performance, when we're talking about nobody that's hurt, people that just are using it because their trainers telling them you have to wear this brace so that you can look better when you're showing, I think that is doing more harm than good.
I think that's a fair point. Anybody else want to jump in on posture braces?
I think we forget the fact that if the posture brace puts you into that position, it means you physically can get there. So put in the hard yards and strengthen the musculature that actually is responsible for that job, and be able to utilize that correctly. You're then going to benefit from that long term, not only on the horse when you're using the posture brace, but when you are doing your job, like you're at your desk and things like that, or you're doing day-to-day activities and you're actually utilizing your body a little bit more effectively and efficiently. I think that's the most important part as well, is that we put ourselves into these positions, and if the brace can actually get you there, it means it's actually physically able to do that. So let's utilize the muscles and go from there. The other thing that you find with those braces is that then you're into that forced position. You then actually can't move the shoulder, you can't move that pec girdle even forward or slightly. You're fixed in that position, and as we know, if you're rigid with your riding, that's not very adaptable, and that doesn't help you with the horse. If you become rigid, the horse then is rigid, and then it's just this flow-on effect from there as well. So that's a really important point to think about as well.
Yeah, and to add to what Tosh was saying, what I've seen typically is that if a rider is wearing one of those, because they can't move then from that position, they compensate in other ways in their body or overcompensate in other ways. So what I've found was that riders that did ride in it like this, then ended up hollowing their back and not keeping their core engaged. And often then they would be giving from their hip instead of being able to give from their shoulder. And so you lose the connection from the hind end to the front end because you literally can't follow it with a moving shoulder and moving elbow. I actually found more success with my riders wearing the shoulder braces around the barn, just because it kind of reminded them to use that space while they were doing other things. And then when they got in the tack, taking it off because they were fighting against it in the saddle.
Okay, that's a really good point.
I think with braces, I think you've got to think about what you're using them for. And, you know, it's not your 1 hour on the horse or even your 2 or 3 hours on the horse that is causing this. So your 1 hour of wearing it, 2 hours wearing it isn't necessarily going to fix it either. If you're using a brace or some sort of kinesthetic taping or something like that for a proprioceptive skill purpose, but let's say your coach wants you to know what it feels like to have this back here or something, then maybe that's an appropriate use of a brace or taping, because you can use like you know, I forget what it's called.
Kinesio tape.
Rock tape.
Kinesio tape, that's the one. That sounds very professional. The tape stuff, you know, sticky stuff.
Tape stuff. I knew what you meant, Jenny. Don't worry about it. I was totally got that.
If you're using that for a coaching aid, fine, because, you know, even in horses, there's lots of research on. I think Hilary Clayton's done a lot of work on wearing little ankle bracelets, and it helps the horses do like passage and piaffe movements and stuff. So there's a lot to be said for that. It's like if I dropped a can of Coke that you thought was full in your hand, you would automatically overproduce a bit of movement, and you'll do the same if you have a brace on for a short amount of time. So you might be able to use it for that, or you might be able to put it on for a little bit of time just to remind you about what it feels like. But I think if you're using it to correct something or hope that it's just going to magically make you better, you're wasting your time. And I'd much rather someone show me a receipt that they've returned one, and I'll match the amount of money they spent. Some of these things can be 40, 50 quid. I'll take you on, I'll prove it. Come and sign up for the same amount of money and we'll make you better in a similar amount of time you'd be wearing it, because it's, you know, there's all other things I didn't even know existed, t-shirts and all sorts of things. And there's a lot to be said for placebo, like I said last time. So if you feel like it's making you better, you know, fine, and you're happy to spend your money on that. But I really do think, you know, when people are saying they don't have the finances for a massage or yoga classes or a trainer that actually will evidence-based make you better, I think you have to question why you're spending your money on it, because
it can be tempting. It can be tempting to think, oh, do you know what? It's a quick fix. But
I see all these things, especially this time of year. I think, oh,
yeah,
you know, I need this teeth whitening stuff. Oh, this will make me. You just need to go back to the marketing. And if you're just excited by the box and you don't actually know what's inside it, just leave it alone.
Yes, leave it in the box. Okay, let's go on to another question, which is best strengthening exercises to keep your shoulders back while riding. I did a lot better when I could rock climb regularly, which is obviously huge upper body strength, but now I've lost a lot of that strength and the ability to keep myself upright is more challenging. Lisa, I'll come to you first.
Is it specific in the saddle or outside of? I couldn't quite hear that part.
Specific to when they're riding, they find lost a lot of the strength and ability to keep themselves upright. I presume when riding, to keep your shoulders back while riding. So yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think maybe the whole, at least for me, the takeaway from this roundtable is that, like most of what we're saying, is that the biggest difference you can make in your riding is actually outside of the saddle, you know, and it's working with a trainer, and if, especially for somebody that used to be actively climbing, it's actually climbed quite a bit also. That's fantastic, because there's not a lot that you can do in the tack that's going to specifically strengthen your upper body. I mean, the go-to is things like going into a 2-point you know, and strengthening yourself that way, but that's not really going to do your upper body much. And I think you're going to do more damage to your position by focusing on that while riding than you would by taking 30 minutes, you know, every other day and going through a specific strength training regime, whether it's yoga or weights or, you know, bands or tape.
So what would you recommend that she does off the saddle or out of the saddle that will then help her when she gets back in?
Yeah. I mean, so I obviously, I'm a big yoga person. So for me, I do a lot of yoga movements that are strength-based too. And so things that are a little bit more active, like I might be holding poses, things like plank, doing your on your elbow plank, where you're on elbow switching up and down to regular plank and come back down. Anything that you can do to stabilize and strengthen those shoulders so that you're sweeping up and back, opening your chest is what the term that they say. That type of movement. I actually have quite a few flows online that I could send over if that person wants to message me too, that would help. But I mean, for stuff like climbing and weights, get in the gym or your home gym.
I find it really interesting that you've gone back again to the gains that you can make out of the saddle. I don't know if any of you saw the pictures or watched any of the 5-star at Po a couple of weeks ago. And Laura Collett, who won, was out on the cross country London 52. She had a tricky jump over the first, I think it was the second element of a combination. And she sort of saw a stride. She managed to stay in the saddle. I don't know how, because he'd really left a leg. It was going down a bank. She pitched forward and she credited basically saving it to her trainer at home, because her core strength meant that whereas she could have so easily just popped out the side door, she didn't. And there are some great picture sequences that you can go online and search for. But essentially, she stayed on board. The horse, she put it on a stride and he saw it, went, and she went on to win. So it's a really kind of nice example of where it can actually make that massive difference at the top level. Anybody else want to make any comments on that one, or should we move on to the next question?
Just one thing. So going on from what we were saying before about it's not just the hour that we spend in the saddle, it's the whole day that we go from there. So like a rounding of shoulders and that poor posture definitely comes from poor habits or poor postural habits, as well as then muscle imbalances and things like that. So then making sure that you assess your working space or what you're doing throughout the day, and just going, okay, is my laptop or my computer set up as correctly as it should ought to be? Is the screen in the middle of my eye line? All those sorts of things. Am I in a good chair? Do I sit with good posture as best as I can? We all can't maintain good posture 24/7. That's just not a thing. But if we can try to do that a little bit more frequently throughout the day, the more we get aware of that, the more it becomes a little bit more automatic, and then it can flow on from there as well. So that's really good. And then just really looking at the musculature that then, like what I think Jenny was saying before, the posterior chain and things like that. So your traps, your lower traps especially, your serratus anterior, and sort of your lats and things like that to help stabilize. You need to get that sort of posterior chain strong in order for that ability to have the stamina in the saddle as well. So yeah, that's my other two little points.
I've got a couple of things, if you don't mind me chipping in before we move on. I think we have to think about, like, go back to a needs analysis and look at what we need for our sport. So something like a jockey, where they have a lot of like forward back movement, might be very different to, or even an eventer, for example, at the end, you know, and they're trying to get to the end, or it's going to be very different from your jesters rider. So I think also in terms of best exercises, I think we come back to that irritating, I can't tell you that because it depends. But I think I would then look at, you know, if you're a swimmer or a triathlete or you're a throwing sport athlete, you're going to need a lot more overhead rotation. So we're obviously going to have to work on movement patterns and resisting things that. Whereas with riders, yeah, we need proper strength in the direction that they'll be moving. So they're very unlikely, unless they fall off, to come up and over. So whilst it would be sensible to have some like global movements, majority of it is resistive, like, and stabilization. We want the humerus to stay in the joint and we don't want it to be coming out. We also want them to get used to perturbations, because obviously we're working in the hands. So we want our shoulders to stick here, not stick, I don't mean like stick rigidly, but we want our hands to be able to move freely without the body coming back and forth. And a lot of that is the core that we came back to with the lower back pain. It's not so much arms necessarily, but we do want that resistive stuff. So we want the humerus stuck in the joint, so we want the shoulders to be good at resisting. We need the shoulders to have good nervous proprioception, so that if we have perturbations in the rein or the horse pulls on us, we're able to quickly and athletically, which brings Tony's point back, come back to position and not be like, oh, our arms are out here, what's going on? Or, you know, one's bent this way. We can identify that. And we'll want to keep the brain informed of joint position. So whilst there is no one best exercise, I like to do, and it depends where you are in your training program, but I would be doing things like farmers carries, contralateral carries, keeping the shoulder depression, you know, like dumb waitery type things, wall slides, banded. So there's lots of different things, but the main thing I'd be trying to do is how can I keep the shoulder safe? I might even do like hang off the bars so that we get, you know, so that we can do like scap retraction, protraction, not necessarily one-armed, but you know, we might see how long we can hold there. If pull-ups, you know, great. So press-ups, great for thoracic core. So there's not one exercise, but that's what I'd be thinking. And you know, what do you need your shoulder to do? Do you need your shoulder to do this movement and this movement? Not really. So let's not worry too much about that. Focus on what it does need to be good at.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Okay, next question has come in from Germany. Due to my scoliosis, I struggle with keeping my shoulders back. They always come forward and my upper back is always a little bit round. As a result, my reins and connection with the bit is not the best. Do you have any suggestions as to how I could progress? Anybody would like to get us started with that one?
Yeah, I'll start on that one because I work with quite a few riders with scoliosis. And it all depends on the type of scoliosis. And again, my PT and I, we look at exactly what type they have before we start to try to help them strengthen their posterior chain, because that's what we're talking about. But structurally, it's gonna have a different type of strategy, because some muscles are gonna be very short while other muscles are gonna be lengthened. So we have to do it appropriately, or at least come up with a plan appropriately, so that this person not only is getting stronger, but we don't aggravate or hurt them while in the process of strengthening them. So there's a couple different types of scoliosis that we see. There is going to be the thoracic type of scoliosis, where the curve is going more up top, the lumbar, where you see it curve just at the bottom. In the middle, so in between your thoracic and your lumbar, thoracolumbar is, we'll see a big curve just in the middle of the spine. And then a combination of both, where now you see that traditional question mark looking thing, right? Because it's curved both at the top and at the bottom. So it's important to find out what type you have, because I think from what their question is, they have something going up in that thoracic area. So I'm going to guess that their stability is going to be a little bit more towards their left shoulder. So their left shoulder is probably the one that they're having issues with, because since the muscles are very tight and short, it's very hard to create force through them, right? So they're only there because of the stiffness. The body just created a muscle that was stiff and not lengthened and having the ability to shorten. The other side, because it's constantly long, when you try to do a massage or something, it's painful because it doesn't know how to relax, right? So some of the things that we try to do is, once we identify, is make the shorter side stronger as much as we can. So we do a lot of protraction, retraction exercises, and that's where we're doing things like Lisa was talking about, where we'll put them in plank positions and do some sort of push-up plus, we call it, where you're just bringing your shoulder blades together and pulling them apart. And they're going to start to notice the feedback that they get on what the range of motion is. So that way they can understand what can they do and how we're improving. We also try to do depression and elevation, which Jenny was talking about, where now they're moving their arms up and trying to touch the ceiling, which brings the shoulders up to the ears, and then depressing, which brings the shoulder blades down to their hip. Again, they're going to start noticing some things or lack of movement. But what we're trying to do is just give them the feedback, because they don't know what they can and can't do. So when we get them first to identify what is the function that your shoulder has now? Then we can work within a box of how we're going to improve them within their box. So we're not going to make anybody non-scoliosis. We don't reverse that. What we try to do is give them a range, and we're going to improve their function. So once we get those movements dialed in, then we'll do everything unilateral, and which means we're going to do one arm at a time. And so we'll do things like rows, where the row is not so much to pull your elbows back and start rotating your shoulders like this. It's more of a, can you feel your muscle shorten and then drive your shoulder down? Can you get a little bit of depression? And they'll have trouble doing that, but after a while, they can start getting a little bit more range of motion, a little bit more function. And we're just talking about small changes, but that small change, A, reduces the level of pain when they're riding, B, improves their performance. Do they still have scoliosis? Yes, but they feel so much more confident that they're able to ride because we got them that much better. So it's all about addressing, as a coach, what the expectations of training is going to be. Once you set the expectations, you find what your areas that you can improve on are. And then you just start challenging those areas and moving up that level of function. And it takes time, but with time, they start learning how to move better. And that's what training is for me. Teaching you how to have that internal cue or internal feedback to know what your body's doing, so that when you're riding, you don't need things like a sling. You don't need things like anything to help you externally, because you know on your own what it should feel like. So I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Yeah. I would like to. Great. Really, really well said, Tony. I think one of the things when you're in the TAC is that you're trying to figure out your postural influence as well as your efficacy of aids. And those two independently are very challenging. So now we've put them together because contact is challenging as a rider anyway. And as a developing rider, one of the things that we've done out of the TAC is you can take a set of reins or of stretchy bands, but we use reins because that's what we're holding anyway. And you can tie them to a chair in front of you, and you can sit on one of those big giant bouncy balls that you guys all use other terms for, and then you take the reins and you take a little feel with both, and then do things like lift one, lift the other, lift one, all while maintaining even feel on the rein. Because what you'll find is that you'll catch somewhere and you're like, oh no, I don't have that here, and then moving one in a circle while the other was going up and down. And so you just start wherever your arms are, which you don't ride like this, obviously, but wherever your arms are, that you're keeping feel the whole time in this range, so that you're starting to hardwire, I must move this or move that, but you have to have what feel feels like before you can really combine those two complications. And it's just a quick way to go, oh, that's what this should feel like. And then you do it without a horse's mouth. So if you're pulling a little too hard, you're like, the chair falls over and you go, not that hard. So.
I think that's really, really important. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to add? Now, I've got one more question to come in, but then I think we're about out of time for this show. Tash, I think you had a question come into you just before we started recording, actually.
Yeah, it kind of, we've already spoken about it with the shoulder position. How do I improve my shoulder position and stop it from rounding? And then one of the things she said, that she drops through one side and sticks that elbow out. And I think we've pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything there, that our body has imbalances and our body has discrepancies from left to right. And it's about trying to find what they are and then appropriately seek help and get that stabilization, strengthening, lengthening, whatever it might be that's causing that, to then go on and specifically prescribe from there, and looking at the shoulder function and what's required. And like Lisa was just saying, which particular movement might be causing that a little bit more. So whether it's lifting, turning, twisting, whatever it is then utilizing that knowledge and that information to then go further forward into that specific exercise prescription. So.
Brilliant. I think there have been some really, really good points that have come out of this show. working with what you've got to a degree. Nobody is the same as anybody else. Everybody has their slight differences, and working with that to make sure that you can be in the best situation that you can be, getting help from the appropriate people when you need it. And now is the perfect time to do that, because as Tony very rightly pointed out earlier on, sometimes you do need to rest. And actually now is a good time to be taking a few moments to make sure that you can be in as good a possible shape going into 2021 as you can be. We will have another one of these shows coming up for you very soon. If you would like to send in any suggestions, then we would love to hear from you. I'll just go around very, very quickly. If we can just give Instagram handles, where people can find them, where they can send them in, that would be perfect. Jenny, I'll start with you.
Okay, you can find me at eventfit_rider.performance on Instagram, or EventFit Rider Performance on Facebook, or www.eventingfit.com.
Tash?
The Eventing Physiologist on Instagram and Facebook, and www.eventingphysiologist.com.
Perfect. Tony?
Yeah, Coach Sando Training on Facebook and Instagram, and coachsandotraining.com.
Brilliant. And finally, last but not least, Lisa?
OM Riding, both on Facebook and Instagram, and omriding.com.
Perfect. There you go. We hope you've enjoyed it. I am at Nicole Brown Media on Instagram and Facebook. I will happily pass your questions on for them to be answered by these brilliant, brilliant people. We hope that you have enjoyed the show. We hope you've learned something as well, and get in touch, because we would love to hear from you and see what you would like us to talk about next. But a big thank you to Jenny, to Tash, to Tony, and to Lisa, and we'll be back very soon. Thanks for watching.